What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Dan here. And I had planned to do this video actually from my office on my computer. Unfortunately, when I went to go use it, I decided, hey, it's just about the right time to do an update, and you can't click out of it. So, doing it here now. However, I do promise you guys that one thing. I know this is just kind of an intro to the video. We'll be doing some new videos. I've actually written a script for one on the internet coming up, but that's not why I did this video. Anyway, you look forward to that. What I kind of wanted to talk about is this kind of myth that a lot of big business and conservatives, not all, but a number have been throwing around, and neolibs too, is so everyone remembers when Trump ran for president, he talked about we're going to make America great. We're going to make it, basically the idea was we're going to make it like it was in the 1950s and 60s. Now a lot of people are like, oh, especially because on a more conservative side, some people are thinking rise in racism, which I think is a little stupid, but I understand the link because the 1950s were, despite a time of good economic prosperity for everyone, there was oppression done to minority groups, mainly Latinos and the LGBT community. I mean, LGBT was considered a mental disease back then. I mean, technically, being trans is I don't know how to describe it. It's just a state basically where you're out of sync with who you are. Maybe that's a mental issue. Maybe it's a body issue. Who knows? Aside from the point. But aside from that, let's what I think some people mean, because the conservatives tend to be more religious, it does feel like, oh, we're gonna push God and Jesus. The thing is they forget is, despite the fact that the U.S. was trying to portray itself as one of the more religious, in contrast to the Soviet Union, who was atheistic, which is bullshit. Because if you look at what Stalin was pushing, he was anti-evolution. He believed that you could create basically the ultimate human being through Soviet propaganda. So basically, evolution denier. You had Mao. This kind of comes out of perspective of reading the Three Body Problem, which is a book. I know it's a fiction, but it does set in. Then there's this part set in the 1960s during the Chinese Cultural Revolution, and they were really bad. I mean, like, there was a scientist. One of the main characters, her dad was a scientist who had worked with Einstein, but during the Cultural Revolution, he had been brought up on stage and basically was told, "Oh, you're pushing theism because what created the universe?" Because he was a physicist, he's like, science doesn't claim one thing or another, and that's a problem that people don't get. But that's beside the point, beside my argument. But it is a good kind of point of bullshit that a lot of people don't think about. But so back in the 1950s and 60s, why were we economically good? Why was these such good times that the Republicans daydream about going back? I mean, some of them could do it because they want to go back to traditional values. However, I think some, and even there is a certain, there's a large group on the liberal side who actually, in many ways, does want to go back to the 1950s. Not the cultural things that were going on, not the anti-LGBT, not the race, the segregation that was occurring at the time, which was actually slowly being dismantled in the 1950s and 1960s with things like Brown versus Board of Ed, LBJ signing of the Civil Rights Act, so on and so forth. Those are important things that happened at the time, and just like that now, there are important things happening. But the thing is, the reason why we got a Martin Luther King, we got a generation of, basically we got why we got NASA, why we got the reputation at the time being one of the most well-educated, most technologically advanced nations on the planet. And you know what that was? We had well-funded public education. We had recreational centers that were set up to basically help avoid crime because kids had stuff to do. And how was this all paid for? Well, here's the thing that the billionaires, the conservatives, and the neoliberals don't want you to know. It was all paid for from tax money. Yes, tax money. And in fact, the billionaires don't want you to remember that at the time they had a very high tax rate. Someone like Jeff Bezos would probably be worth about half of what he is today. However, think about that. Think about someone like Jeff Bezos. Let's go. I forget how much he's worth. I heard somewhere like 16 billion. Now, don't get me right. I like the fact that Jeff Bezos is building rockets because I'm a huge. I mean, that's the one thing they talk about. There are two things that ignite. I've heard people say two things that instantly ignite the child inside for everyone: dinosaurs and space. And for me, it's always been space, pushing the bounds of our knowledge out. So I think that's good. I think the fact he saved one of my, speaking of space, my favorite show is The Expanse. You guys know, if you guys are watching my stuff, I love that show. Thank you for doing that, Mr. Bezos. But I do think you need to pay your fair share of taxes. If you don't want to pay, I think that if we can't have a tax, because they're going to fight us tooth and nail if we want to push back what essentially were the FDR era reforms on tax, meaning the very wealthy help through their tax fund and my tax money, property, everything, help fund the middle class, because during that time, very large middle class. What started happening in the middle class when we started deregulating the banks and allowing them basically to run and started massively funding the military industrial complex instead of doing stuff like, for instance, space exploration, which I know it's not as sexy as a hydrogen bomb. I'd argue the Sea Dragon's more sexy, but beside the point, it wasn't funded well because fear. And what happened? Wall Street took advantage of the fear during Black Monday. They're like, oh, well, if we hadn't been so regulated, we could have prevented. So they convinced the Republicans to basically unchain a dog with a biting issue. I'm sorry, but I do think that businesses do better regulated. They're a lot like and I'm speaking from experience, they're a lot like a person with autism. They're really smart and really good at doing certain tasks. However, if you let them in a structured environment, they can cause a lot of damage. Not necessarily physical, but they can cause a lot of problems. Maybe they say something they're not supposed to, or touch something, or just freak out because, someone's in their personal space. Because that does happen. I'm not stereotyping. I'm saying this has happened. Like, I've got income. And that's the problem with a lot of businesses. Businesses need to have a very structured environment. It actually benefits them because then they know what's acceptable and what's not. They're able, as long as they stay within the regulation. And I think there needs to be enforcement. But, again, I'm going... all that enforcement, all that, business regulation did help, that higher tax code, the greater regulation on business, the anti-trust stuff, which came from the previous Roosevelt, Teddy, one of the Republican presidents that's I think a lot of modern Republicans don't want to admit was their guy. And they have to be reminded every time they look at Mount Rushmore with his big old teeth smiling. Ha ha, I broke a big business. It's like, bully! Yeah, I love that. The two of the most progressive Republicans are on the side of Mount Rushmore. Lincoln and freaking Roosevelt. But besides that point, that's kind of the real big issues. A lot of them I think a lot of them don't want to pay their taxes. Personally, I think, okay, we can do a lot of government monitor. A lot of people want to encourage private enterprise doing stuff or let them do what they do. And I'm actually was thinking, like I thought about running for public office. I'm in California. I mean, I could run for state representative. I couldn't run currently for U.S. senator because Barbara Feinstein. I think it's Barbara. Dianne Feinstein is still currently in office, and she doesn't not get done until the next presidential race, so can't run for that. Although maybe I could run for governor. That might be cool. But I've always thought of, and it was interesting. So my dad and I were talking about this. This concept is what we call response. I might be stealing this from Lenin, but this I think is what I call responsible capitalism. And what it is I think the tax code should. I heard a lot of people say, well, we need to do charities, blah blah blah. I think the tax code should be written to promote progressive ideas, and make the businesses do them willingly, not at the tip of a blade. And how do you do that? Well, you write the tax code, ladies and gentlemen, that and such that they want to do these things. For instance, I think if let's say I were governor, I would propose legislation because you can't do this. That would basically encourage it would be all municipal buildings would convert to renewables and have backup batteries because you need that even with distributed solar. I would also give tax cuts to individuals and corporations who modernized, who began installing their what's called solar panels on their properties. Now here I would have also make some caveats because I live near equestrians and they've bitched about it. I would say, you can't do it. You can't rezone a land for that. It's either for personal use or it's for business use. You can't. It has to be attached to a building, basically. And they'll get mad at me, but I think that's two things. One, it achieves our goal of switching to renewable energy by convincing the private sector to willingly walk in because they're like, here, we'll let you have some money, you can keep some of your money, but you got to put it towards that. I think that's the key to getting a lot of what's it called? Progressive ideas. The private thing is, they try to do the trickle down. They try to trickle down economics. Like, oh, we'll give more money. We'll give tax cuts to the rich so they create more jobs. The problem is you don't add those strings. You don't say we're going to give this tax cut, but you have to use it for something beneficial. If Bloomberg's like, oh, I want a tax, I'm like, fine, but you have to demonstrate you're actually doing something good with it. For instance, tax breaks for charities, tax breaks for modernization of your business infrastructure, improved employee wages. I would give tax cuts for those who are willing to increase employee benefits, paying for education. Like, I would slowly do stuff that would to kind of get them in the right direction. Although I believe that I would still raise taxes in that case because I think, as I said, if you're going to have if you want to have the 1950s economic boom and educational rise, you gotta fund it. And I do think in the end we all do need to fund it through tax. I'm sorry, but I'll say this: if raising my taxes means that we have a higher quality Californian, that we produce, a more well-educated, better paid individual who, in the end, is better for our economy. Because time and time again is shown that countries that take care of their people to ensure they get benefits tend to thrive. even those who were in decline, it can actually, for instance, Britain, following World War One, was in decline. Not even World War One. So it was on its rise. I meant two. World War Two. I was thinking Germany for World War One, but in World War Two, following the end of the war, we saw the beginnings of decolonization for Britain and France, and what was happening during that time is because Britain simply couldn't afford its colonies because it had to rebuild. But it realized under conservative government that, if we're going to rebuild, we need to make sure that we have a healthy workforce so we can rebuild faster. So what they did is in the 1940s, the British enacted, universal health care. Why? Because they realized we need to, if everyone's healthy, then we have healthy workers, which means things get built faster. And hell, even freaking Harry S. Truman, who was a businessman, I would argue a better businessman than the current, by leagues compared to Trump, because he actually went up and said, you know what, we do need universal health care. You know why? Because because workers are the U.S.'s greatest resource, and if you ensure they're well paid and healthy, they work harder. We've even proven this. The Microsoft did this in Japan, where they basically, I think they gave, prior to the outbreak, they gave workers every other Friday off, and productivity went way up. So when they talk about us handing out money, they're leeches. I would argue that the billionaires leached the middle class, because instead of that money that we took from you, actually made sure more money was distributed. I mean, isn't it better to have 100 million people making between 50 and 100,000 a year, as opposed to having maybe 100 making between 500,000 to 1.5 billion a year? I mean, does that even sound like, think about all that money? Like you cut that guy's 1 million in half, and you suddenly are funding all those. Look at all that middle class. And you know what's better? It's because middle class people spend fucking money. Think about all that. We spend the most money, which is why when all the middle class people who maybe you're essential workers, you're still working, get that stimulus. What are you gonna do? Me? I'm working class. I'm gonna knock out my credit card debt. That's why. And I know this has become basically dietary, but I think that's one of the big things that the neoliberals, the billionaires, and even the neocons have forgotten is a big middle class. High taxes for the rich and a big middle class is a sign of a good, thriving economy. And I've said enough now, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoy this video, this kind of rant. I know I went all over the place, but I didn't write a script. But my Run an Act video will be coming up soon, and again, as I said, that one is going to be scripted, so it'll be a lot nicer, and there'll be editing. Alright, thank you for watching, and see you guys later. Peace.